A very warm welcome. Glad you could join us. I'm Felicity Ezewike. For today's program, the first half is a review of Pat Onukwuli's Nigeria's oil paradox and quest for refined salvation. Despite being Africa's largest oil producer, Nigeria, according to Pat, faces a paradoxical reality: reliance on imported refined petroleum products. The country's refining capacity struggles to meet domestic demand, resulting in crippling fuel shortages and economic burdens. His article examines the historical, infrastructural, and policy factors contributing to this discrepancy. It also delves into ongoing efforts to revamp the refining sector, including investment in new refineries and rehabilitation of existing ones, aiming to achieve refined salvation and energy sufficiency. Can we attain refined salvation? My guest is an oil and gas expert, Femi Oladehin. Welcome to One Slot, sir.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute honor to be on your show.
We're glad to have you. Now, as an expert, I want to put you on to define how this conversation is going to go. Where do we start with demystifying Nigeria's oil sector, often described as the more you see, the less you understand?
So one of the things that has driven the Nigerian oil sector is actually that opaqueness of everything, from data of actual production to refineries to our ability to even understand what the key drivers of the industry are. And I think that this opaqueness is driven by a deep sense of corruption. Everything around the fact that people can't find information, where government is very, very, reluctant to make information available, where the private sector, who are also parties in the industry, are reluctant to make information available. I think all of this is driven by deep seated corruption that's part of the values for the country. There's no rocket science to refining petroleum products, as you referred to. Petroleum refineries have been in this world for almost 100 years, even more than 100 years, from the first refinery that started in the US to where we are today, where multiple refineries all over the world are producing petrol and other similar products on a regular basis. But what you find in Nigeria's case is obviously a deliberate policy by the public sector, by government, to ensure that, and when I say government, I'm talking more the civil service, the people who work in the refineries, to sabotage the process for the benefit of a very few people. And that's how our economy has suffered the drain that we've had in the last 20 years. When you look at the numbers that have been touted as Nigeria's economic loss due to imported fuel, the reality is that in any other country in the world, we'll be in a permanent state of inquiry, of people asking difficult questions and holding people accountable for the damage that has been done to this country. Nigeria has imported over $100 billion of petroleum products in the last 15 years. That is unacceptable for a country that produces its own crude.
Yeah, you said something I'd like us to start off this conversation from. You mentioned two things: corruption, and the reluctance to share information is part of that corruption. But I want you to speak specifically to this reluctance to share information that is valuable in the sector.
Look, I mean, the truth is that...
No, also clarify, this information you're talking about, is it its availability to the players in the industry or to citizens and consumers of the product?
So the information is the availability to the people, to the consumers of the product, and to the nation generally. So NATI was a body that was put together to basically improve transparency in the oil and gas industry. And NATI has consistently complained that the quality of information that it was getting was suspect. And as such, it couldn't properly estimate what the losses have been or what the performance of the oil and gas industry has been. Now, I would say that there is a conspiracy between government and the private sector in this space. Because what has happened is that the opaqueness and lack of responsibility on behalf of government has provided an opportunity for profiteering for the public sector. Sorry, for the private sector. So if government is deliberately incompetent, the private sector would benefit from it. That's how we are structured, right? If there's a lacuna, somebody's going to step in to benefit from that lacuna. And that's what you've seen happen with the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. It is so mind-boggling that given the level of investment that we have put at the public sector level into refineries, we have 4 refineries across the country with nameplate production of 450,000 barrels a day. And for those refineries not to have produced literally a liter of petrol in the last 15 years is such that, honestly, we should have a permanent state of inquiry on the industry.
So 2 questions. Nati says complaints about the quality of information and maybe what the losses are. What are the implications here? Or are we already living the implication of this lack of adequate information? And on the flip side, how does Nati continue to maintain its relevance?
So look, the truth is that we are living the consequence. As at the time when I was leaving the country yesterday or 2 days ago, we were talking about queues again. You know, it's becoming a vicious cycle, right? We've been having queues from when I was in secondary school 30 odd years ago, and those queues are still there. And the drivers of those queues are exactly the same things that were driving those queues those 30, 35 years ago. And we're still here dealing with the same implications. So that in itself tells you that there's a conspiracy of the elite to ensure that this status quo is maintained. However, to answer your second question, does that remove the relevance of Nati? I don't believe so. I think it's a matter of time that Nigeria will get to the point where we will start to hold our governments accountable properly for the things that they should be doing and the things they should have done. And I think that when that day of reckoning comes, organizations like Nati will be fundamental towards helping us solve this problem because they have data. They're able to use unusual sources or unusual ways to get data. And that data points to some extent to the level of rot within the industry. So when Nati produces reports that tells us that billions of dollars have been siphoned from the country through the importation of petroleum products, I think that's verifiable. You can do a simple math and multiply the number of liters of petrol that we import on a monthly basis and get a delta for what the level of corruption is and estimate how much losses that we've had. So these are real life situations, and Nati continues to remain relevant. Now, what you would hope is that government will be invested in further strengthening Nati and giving them the legal backing to ensure that there is a high level of reporting that happens within that industry.
Okay, I couldn't help just smiling like an ordinary person thinking about, the correlation between how Nati retains its line on refined product is something that we already know. But how vital is a need for maybe a re-evaluation of our information sharing protocols or something? Because if we cannot get information from, just based on what you're saying and thinking aloud as an ordinary person, if we don't have the right information, making the right decisions will continue to elude us. So how do we go about refining our information?
So let's define the problem properly. Okay. Over the last 3 months, for example, NNPC has consistently come out with, or they had consistently come out with blatantly false information telling Nigerians at some point that there was no subsidy on petroleum products. Information available to the market, to the industry, proved to us that was a lie. There was a subsidy. It was a subsisting subsidy on the industry, and the fact that NNPC could blatantly come to the Nigerian public and lie to us and say that there was no subsidy tells you the depth of the rot that is in the industry, because ordinarily we should be able to have that conversation without any fear or favor and say that, look, there is a subsidy being paid, and it's easy for us to calculate that subsidy because if you do the landing cost of petrol multiplied by the exchange rate, we knew that, for example, at the time when NNPC was selling petrol for 600 naira, street prices should have been around 1,000 naira, but they lied to us, and because of that, we couldn't respond to when it became clear that they couldn't continue to afford to pay for those subsidies. What did we have to do? We had to take it on the chin. Nigerians now are paying over 1,000 naira for a liter of petrol, which should be the true cost of the petrol. So you see, when you go back to what impact that is having on us, the reality is that the policy-making decisions or the policy-making information that is available to people will drive the quality of the information or the quality of the decisions that are taken. So if the information that we're being fed as Nigerians is blatantly false, the reality is that the decisions that are being made as a result of that information, the decisions are going to be negative decisions, and that's why the quality of information is important. We must know the true state of our refineries. NNPC have been telling us that refineries were going to start production at least for the past 24 months, giving us various dates. Today, as we speak, today is the 15th of October, there is no drop of petrol that is coming from NNPC. And that is a reality of where we are today as a market.
So, okay, I think that's a little mundane to talk about changing attitude at this stage. We have to have, like you said, a better information protocol. I think I kind of missed my wires earlier when I was talking about, why Nigeria is relying on imported refined petroleum. The evidence is there, the corruption and the issues. But for us to also chart a way forward, we need to know how we got here. So what are some of the historical factors, in your view, that led to this reliance that we currently experience?
So look, the damage to the Nigerian oil infrastructure actually started during the military era, specifically during the government of General Abacha. So what had happened is that General Abacha, when the refineries were due for turnaround maintenance, probably around 1993, 1994, because of the corrupt nature of General Abacha's government, this was given to them. What the government did basically was award contracts to companies that did not have the competence to be able to deliver the turnaround maintenance. And those companies obviously damaged the refineries. So that was the start of the problem. So imagine, as technical and as expensive as a refinery is, you're trying to repair a refinery, rather than give the contract to companies that have proven competence, proven expertise. He gave the contract to his proxies and his cronies, and those monies were looted and stolen. So by not maintaining the refineries, of course, the refineries broke down, starting from the Kaduna refinery, then the Warri refinery broke down, and eventually the Port Harcourt refinery as well broke down. Now, of course, one thing with refineries is that the longer you stack refineries without, without maintaining them or without repairing them, then the damage in the infrastructure worsens. And that's what we saw. So the damage in the infrastructure continued to worsen. However, by the time we got to the 2000s and early 2010, 2011 period, what should have been done at that time was for us to, as a country, in a very disciplined way, commit to repairing those refineries. But you know what the Jonathan government did? The Jonathan and Yaradua government, they gave licenses to people to start importing petroleum products. Now, the thing is, if you give people a license to import a product that ordinarily you have industries that are able to manufacture those products, what you've done, in essence, is to give them the powers to sabotage you. So what the oil and gas industry obviously did was sabotage every effort the NNPC made to repair its refineries. simply because the monies they were making from the imported products was always going to outweigh whatever output was coming out of NNPC. And of course, we know that a lot of people got licenses to build refineries, but didn't have the financial capacity to do so. So when you look at that trajectory of we built the refineries in the 70s, early 80s, they were supposed to have regular turnaround maintenance. Usually a refinery should shut down once every 2-3 years for at least 28 days for proper turnaround maintenance. We oil in the engines and all of that. And then you bring it back to production. Now, if you don't do that and you continue running the refinery, they start to break down, different components start to break down one after the other. Eventually, the refinery itself completely breaks down. Now, when it's time for you to restart that refinery, there's a lot more investment that is required. And for a country like Nigeria, we just never had a discipline of making those investments.
No, but despite,
we got there.
Yeah, but despite all the corruption and the challenges, one would have thought that a refinery like Dangote might have been an impossibility, considering what you've described about the sector and what we know that is on the ground. But just talk to us about, what does Dangote Refinery stand for in the oil and gas sector? Is it the beginning of the demystifying of the oil sector that it's hoped for, or it's just maybe going to complicate the situation even further?
So let me put this out there. Alhaji Dangote is not a fool. Alhaji Dangote has put $20 billion of his and the capital of banks and financial institutions at risk to building that refinery. For a man who's always quiet, you've seen him speak and scream and shout in the last 6 months. That's because he knows the amount of investment that he has put into that refinery, and he needs to make money from it. So I would say that the success of the commissioning of the Dangote refinery in all instances should be a catalyst for the demystifying of the oil and gas industry. NNPC cannot come to us and lie to us anymore, because there is an efficient private sector run, private sector developed, private sector operated, private sector maintained refinery that is right there in Lagos that we can see. So if NNPC comes to us and tells us that, oh, it's going to take $2 billion to do their turnaround maintenance, we can always look at Dangote for reference and use that as a benchmark as to what it means for us as a country. Now, the general expectation is that with Dangote demystifying the refining business, that other Nigerian billionaires, people who have the capacity to do this, who have been eyeing that sector, can now take the bold decision of investing in their own refineries. They don't have to be as big as Dangote's refinery at 650,000 barrels a day. Even 100,000 barrels a day refinery would be an efficient and profitable venture. So I would say that irrespective of what NNPC does, the Nigerian oil and gas sector is set for a significant uplift and a significant improvement in perception as a result of the development of the Dangote refinery. Now, if Dangote now becomes profitable and is delivering consistent returns, you would imagine that that would become a catalyst for other players in the industry. Don't forget that BUA is currently constructing a 250,000 barrels a day refinery as well. And so there are people who are already looking at investments in that. There are a number of modular refineries in the Niger Delta that are doing between 1,000 and 5,000 barrels a day.
We're time constrained, so I'm going to interject. In the meantime, I have 2 questions more I think I can squeeze in. In the meantime, the Nigerian citizens are going to have it tough, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Because the private sector is not going to subsidize the cost of petrol. So if anything happens to crude oil prices, you should expect that immediately that should reflect in the cost of petrol. However, let me say this, and it's very important. Nigerians need to be patient. As of today, there is a glut in the crude oil market. We're expecting that crude oil prices are going to fall below $70 in the next month or so. The lower crude oil prices go, then naturally Nigerians should expect that a reduction in prices should be the concomitant effect. And I think that is something that we can fairly expect over the next few years, especially as demand for crude oil slows in countries like China and Europe.
I guess I'll say thank you for that straw of hope to hold on to, that we're not going to drown indefinitely. Beyond the Petroleum Industry Act that we now have, what other or what further policy shift would you recommend for consideration in helping us fix the sector's challenges?
So I think one major policy that we need to talk about is security. The biggest challenge that this industry has had in the last 10, 15 years has been the destruction of infrastructure in the upstream space of the country. You know, so people are producing 50,000 barrels of crude oil, and up to 50 to 70% of that crude is being stolen. That is a major drain, and it's one of the reasons why we haven't seen significant investment in that sector in the last 10 years. The PIA is great, but for the PIA to actually deliver its long-term results, one thing that has become very clear is that we need to solve the security problems in the Niger Delta. The moment we're able to do that, I expect that the industry is going to experience significant growth over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, quickly, your thoughts on the engagement of private security in an effort to manage security in the Niger Delta? It
just reflects the breakdown of the Nigerian state, you know. But if private security is able to deliver it, then so be it. It's the price we have to pay for empowering non-state actors to become the security apparatus of the country. But it's not a sustainable model. You know, we're literally just going to perpetuate gangsterism in the country, and that cannot be good for any economy.
When we started this conversation, I was thinking, you know, I may not have things to ask you. Fortunately, I've not even touched half the questions here. So I'm just going to quickly squeeze this in.
Okay.
Talk about the skill gaps that we have. We keep talking about the refining capacity. Dangote is here. Well, was he able to easily get the required skills? And maybe how are we going to improve on that so it doesn't hold back the changes that you envision for the sector?
So I'm going to give you a real life experience. So there's a client that I'm working with at the moment who's just done a major acquisition. And one of the biggest shocks for that client was that in the core parts of the business that it's acquired, the youngest engineer in that space was not less than 35 years old, if not 40. So there is indeed a skills gap. And one of the things that client has decided is that over the next 5 years, it was going to hire a new generation of young Nigerian engineers from age 25, 26 and train them very quickly. The truth is that the skills gap is a major problem. Dangote had to train thousands of engineers for them to be able to work in his refinery. I think that that's something that our universities have to step up and fix. Give us engineers that are able to work seamlessly into the oil and gas industry and be able to learn and grow in that space. I think all of the investments that we're putting in, it would be a shame if we had to go bring Indians and Chinese to run this infrastructure when Nigerians are actually jobless. So skills gap must be filled, but it has to be filled in a very structured and deliberate way that starts from education in the secondary schools to the universities and easing those people into the workforce by training them properly.
I missed pursuing a part of the conversation where you talked about financing and how Dangote's, sourcing fund for the refinery, to explore your thoughts on financial models that are sustainable. But we're out of time. I'm hoping that in the future we'll be able to have a further conversation on this. Thank you, absolutely, for
Thank you very much.
very
This was
insightful
enjoyable
contribution, Femi.